I want to discuss whether WandaVision broke the economics of vibranium. So obviously, just a warning, there are spoilers for WandaVision in this video. But if you already clicked on it, that means you've already watched the episodes. I'm going to start with the problem that WandaVision potentially created, then go into how it matches up with other things we've seen, and then what it tells us about the economics of vibranium, and specifically, what's going on in Wakanda. What is the problem that WandaVision created? Well, in episode 8, Wanda goes to SWORD and she sees Vision's body. And while she's talking to director Hayward, Hayward mentions the value of vibranium that's in Vision.
But I cannot allow you to take $3 billion worth of vibranium just to put it in the ground.
And the question is $3 billion consistent with what we've seen in other Marvel movies? Now, there are a couple ways that you can go through this. I'll think of two ways to go through it, and both of them are wrong, but I'll go in the most wrong way first, then the less wrong way, and then I'll talk about what we really need to be thinking about as we're talking about vibranium in the MCU. So the most wrong way for us to do this is to ask ourselves, how much does Vision weigh? And then try to calculate the price of vibranium based on his weight and that $3 billion figure. Vision's a tall guy, just eyeballing him. Let's just put him at 200 pounds. Maybe that's a little bit more than Paul Bettany actually weighs, but 200 pounds, it doesn't really matter. That's 90,700 grams, and that works out to about $33,000 per gram, which is pretty close to what I calculated in one of my first videos on this channel. If you want to watch it, you can put it up here, but it's a little cringy, so I don't want to quite reference you there. But remember, this is the wrong way to calculate it in this situation. Why is it the wrong way? Well, one is that we don't know how much vibranium is in that 200 pounds, right? Like, it's clear that Vision is not just vibranium. There's some circuitry in there. How much of Vision is actually vibranium? It gets a little complicated, but the good news is we don't actually have to calculate the price of vibranium based on Vision's weight, because there's another way to calculate this and look at the economics. But again, it's still wrong. So what's that way? Well, we just go back to Age of Ultron, where Ultron paid for Vision's vibranium. When the wire transfers are coming through to Klaue's phone, we see $2.5 billion, but it's not guaranteed that we're actually seeing all the transfers coming through. If we go to Ultron thinking through what he's sending Klaue, we can actually freeze on a single frame that says it was $4.5 billion. So Ultron paid $4.5 billion for the vibranium that he used to build Vision. Does that mean that Vision has $4.5 billion of vibranium? Not necessarily. Ultron is likely paying above market prices because he wants no conflict with Klaue.
But I always say, keep your friends rich and your enemies rich and wait to find out which is which.
Fine, whatever. Money is just digital to him anyway. Here you go. Have an above market price for the vibranium you're giving me. However, how much above market did he pay? It's really hard for me to say. I don't know the exact markup, but let's say it's a 25% markup. That seems pretty generous. It seems like Klaue would be satisfied with that. And it's nice because it gets us to that round number of $4 billion. So in Age of Ultron, we're saying that the market price of Vision's vibranium was $4 billion. Yet in WandaVision, it's $3 billion. Why has the value of the vibranium decreased over this time? Well, there are a couple of reasons. I know I have my preferred reason, but let me just go ahead and address some of those other reasons right off the bat. First, there might have been a loss of vibranium when Vision died. I mean, Thanos rips the Mind Stone out of Vision. We see that Vision is dismembered when he's at SWORD. Maybe we don't have all of the vibranium there. Is it a quarter of the vibranium that's been lost? Well, we can see most of Vision's body in SWORD, and while we might not be able to account for every piece of Vision, it doesn't seem like we're missing 25% of him. A second explanation is to say that Ultron didn't use all of the vibranium when he made Vision. I went back and I tried to find if there was any evidence that there was some vibranium that had been saved. Maybe, did he only use 3/4 of the vibranium that he got from Klaue? I don't know. I think this is a possible explanation for the lower price, but I don't think it's actually that great. It doesn't make my heart sing out with joy. I can tell you what does though. this last explanation. This last explanation is going to go into your understanding of economics, right? Do you remember supply and demand? You can draw these lines across this graph and you can say, well, there's the supply of a good, there's the demand of a good, and the prices depend on how much supply and demand change. If demand increases, the new intersection is a higher price. If demand decreases, there's a lower price. Similarly, if supply increases, prices go down, and if it decreases, prices go up. Now, how much prices go up and down depend on how much the quantity has been shifted, and also what the slope of these lines are. So if we assume that all of the vibranium is in Vision, and we have seen a decrease in that price from $4 billion to $3 billion, that can only mean one of two things. Demand could have gone down, but that doesn't seem likely. It doesn't seem like we have fewer reasons to use vibranium. In fact, it feels like there are more reasons, given that we know that there are attacks from incredibly overpowered extraterrestrial beings. It seems like we would want to get our hands on the most valuable technological advancement that we've ever seen in history. I mean, vibranium can do some crazy things. Seems like we would want to use this more.
Bullet wounds don't just magically heal overnight.
They do here.
So if demand hasn't gone down, what must be the explanation? Well, it must be that supply has increased. Do we have a reason for supply to increase? Yeah, of course. We know that Wakanda is now interacting with the rest of the world. It's not completely open because we do see in Infinity War that they still have that protective hologram, and obviously some of the characters are unfamiliar with Wakanda, so they aren't 100% open, but they are more open with the rest of the world, and it's clear that they can only be open with the rest of the world if they're making vibranium available.
We will be sharing our knowledge and resources with the outside world.
So the global supply of vibranium on the market has increased, and that explains the decrease in price. But there's something even more interesting here. And I'm not talking about the GDP of Westview, New Jersey, which, by the way, let's take a brief pause to think about what Wanda just showed us about how powerful she is. She created $3 billion worth of vibranium in Westview within just the 1 week that she's been on this TV show. If that's the only thing Westview produces in the entire year, that means Westview's GDP is $3 billion. We know from the sign out on the road that Westview's population is about 4,000 people, which means the GDP per capita of Westview is $750,000 per person, making it easily one of the richest places in the entire world, but also one of the places with the highest inequality, since Vision is where all $3 billion is, and that's in one household. And I guess all the other households are super poor relative to them. I mean, they've gotten richer since Wanda has been doing this, but also Wanda's like controlling them. So the richest person in town now controls everybody else, and they're all suffering as a result. Is this supposed to see some critique on capitalism? Is the girl who grew up under Soviet communism now like coming in and being the uber capitalist? That was not where I thought this show was going. Let's go back to what this tells us about the economics of vibranium. When Wakanda opens up to the rest of the world, let's say, I mean, they're putting vibranium out there, but we don't know how much. Well, easily they probably put at least as much as was available before, because there really wasn't that much available before. So let's say they doubled the amount of vibranium on the international market. Well, they were able to double the supply, and yet the price only decreased by 25% from $4 billion to $3 billion. If we were to calculate the elasticity of demand for vibranium, it would be 4. That would be saying it's got elastic demand. That means the demand curve is pretty flat, meaning that even as you increase the supply of vibranium, the price doesn't drop that much. But there's a deeper meaning to that. What it means is that even though Wakanda has significantly increased the quantity of vibranium out there are always people who are willing to get it, and so many people willing to get it that the price stays high. In a fascinating way, Director Hayward's comments have told us something about the economics of vibranium, and they're economics that actually make sense. This seems like it's not that weird that there would be elastic demand for vibranium. That is, the more quantity that gets on the market, people are willing to use it, and they're willing to pay the super high price. and that the price would go down because Wakanda is now on the international market. This is really cool. This has been a fun deep dive into the economics of the Marvel Universe. Now, if you're interested in pop culture and economics, I highly recommend you look at this video where I paid people to watch Cats instead of going to see Star Wars opening weekend. Their reactions are fantastic.